Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session on intuition and healing. It's great to see you. You remind me that we are not alone. Maybe somebody's intuition brought all of this about today. I'm really grateful, as you must be. Before we get too far along, I'd like you to be sure that your microphone and video are off. Thanks. I'm Mary Dispenza. I'm a SNAP leader for those abused by nuns and for those abused by priests. I'd like to tell you that today's session will include time for questions and answers, and you can actually be submitting them during our speakers' talk by using the chat mode. And I'll read them after back to our speaker, and she'll provide great answers. And now I am so honored. I've been waiting for this moment. I've been so excited to introduce our speaker. She's my friend and a very brave and courageous woman. And besides that, Ashley Easter is a writer, speaker, and abuse victim advocate who educates religious and secular communities on abuse, introducing them to safe practices and resources. Ashley is the founder of the Courage Conference, a judgment-free place for survivors of abuse and those who love them to hear inspiring stories from other survivors and advocates about moving forward in boldness. And now I present Ashley Easter.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to be here with you all today. And I'm just gonna give people maybe another minute or so to pop on. I think some people are still joining. Yes, welcome. We got Patrick, Sue, Sandra, Burke, Becky. Let's see, we got so many people joining. Awesome. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Mary. I really appreciate that. Anthony, got Larry. Welcome, Larry. Donna, Brad. Guys, thanks so much for showing up. I'm really appreciative of this, and yeah, just looking forward to chatting with you all today. Like Mary said, I'm Ashley Easter, and I'm going to be talking about intuition and how intuition really is one of the best superpowers that we have as survivors and as advocates of survivors. I'm just going to pull something over on my screen here. Okay, there we go. I think I'm all ready. But before I start talking about intuition, I want to chat with you about how intuition played a role for me and my experience as an abuse survivor. And to do that, I need to give you a little bit of my backstory. So I just want you to know that I'm going to talk a little bit about the abuse I experienced, but I'm not going to go into a lot of graphic detail. So I'm going to try to be sensitive about this as I'm speaking. But, you know, always make sure that you're keeping yourself safe and that if anything is triggering to you, it's okay to take a break, all those types of things. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into my story. So I grew up in an independent fundamentalist Baptist church where both of my grandfathers were pastors in this denomination. And there are so many different types of Baptists. I think there's like maybe 20 different kinds of Baptists, something like that. But this particular denomination, the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist, otherwise known as IFB, they were a particularly strict movement within the Baptist denomination. There was a lot of legalism and a lot of rules that you had to follow as a member of this church. So some of the things that they believed were movie theaters were bad to go to. They believed that women could only dress certain ways or else it would be inappropriate. The Baptist church had just very strict theology, and it not only talked about the theology and the belief system, but it also began to control people's lives and the way they showed up in the world. At least that was my experience. So you've got this independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and then inside of that movement, there are a bunch of smaller movements. One of those is called the homeschooling movement. And I was a homeschooled student. And what I want to say there is there are many different types of breeds of homeschoolers. And during the pandemic, there are so many people who are having to homeschool for reasons of safety, for reasons of schools are, putting information online and their students need to learn at home. Other people homeschool for reasons like maybe their student is an athlete and they want to be a professional athlete and get into the Olympics. A lot of times parents will homeschool their children for those reasons. Some people will homeschool their children for academic reasons because they feel they can provide a better education than what their current school system is offering. So there's lots of reasons to homeschool, but the reason we homeschooled was for very religious reasons. We believed that homeschooling was really the only way to educate children, and that we were doing it God's way. That the public schools and even Christian schools to a degree were kind of dangerous and you could learn evil things there. So we were going to keep our children at home. So I was a homeschooled student in a very isolated environment. So not only was I in this very isolated church community that my grandfathers were pastors of, but I was also a homeschooled student, and that made my experience even more isolating. I really didn't know very many people other than those who were in my church, and maybe a few other homeschool families that went to similar type churches. So Independent Fundamentalist Baptist Church, inside of that is the homeschooling movement. And inside the homeschooling movement, there are other smaller movements. One of those was called the patriarchy movement. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It was about adherence to the patriarchy. So I learned that men were to have power and control over women in the home, church, and in society, that women were not able to be leaders in themselves or leaders in the community, and they were not allowed to be equal partners with their spouses. And basically a woman's role in this cult-like community I grew up in was to get married, say yes to sex, and have as many babies as possible. Okay, so that was the role of a woman. The man's role in this cult-like community was to be the one who made all the big decisions, who controlled and ruled over his wife, the one who made the money and decided what happened with the money. So inside of the patriarchy movement is another smaller movement, and that was called the quiverful movement, which took this patriarchal idea really far. They took a Bible verse out of context in scripture that said something like, children are like arrows in a mighty man's quiver. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. So in this sector of the homeschooling movement, the quiverful movement, we believed that you were supposed to have as many children as possible, with the idea that you would have them like arrows in your quiver, and then when they grow up, you would shoot those arrows out into the world and they would sink into different sectors of society. So you'd have these massive amounts of children, and then each of those children would become a leader in society. So maybe in business, maybe in politics, in media, in church, in schools, just in all different sectors of society. And what I grew up hearing when I was a teenager was something called the 200-year plan. And this 200-year plan was the idea that if your family has 10 kids, and then those 10 kids have 10 kids, and then those 10 kids have 10 kids, and those 10 kids have 10 kids, after 200 years, you will have this astronomical amount of descendants, and they'll shoot those children out into the world, and they will completely dominate the world through overpopulation. And they will be in all these high levels of leadership, and we can pretty much take over the world through overpopulation. So that was the cult-like group that I grew up in. In addition to that, I was also what you call a stay-at-home daughter. And this is where they took the idea of, if in their religion, wives were supposed to submit to their husbands, well, what do we do with unmarried women who are adults? we can't just have them running around not submitting to anybody. So they came up with this idea that we would be stay-at-home daughters, and that's what I was. I practiced homemaking skills. I was preparing for a future husband, planning to have 10 children when I got married. And even as an adult woman, as a 21-year-old woman, my dad was still telling me who I could and could not be in relationships with, what I could and could not wear, trying to dictate the big parts of my life. So this is the group I grew up in. And this is where the intuition piece comes in. When you grow up in a cult-like environment, whether it's a full-on cult or whether it is maybe a smaller mini cult that's just led by a family leader, like a father or mother or a grandparent or something like that, you grow up in a really isolated environment where there's a lot of control. One of the things that they like to do to gain control over you is to push down your autonomy, to silence the intuitive voice you have inside of you, so you'll be more likely to follow their leadership and submit to them when they tell you to obey. And that's exactly what happened to me. As a very little girl, there was something inside of me that was like, something's not right here. This doesn't feel like this is right. I feel like I should be treated equal to my brothers. I believe that I should be able to be a leader when I grow up. And I felt that inside. My intuition was speaking to me. But when I would voice anything like that, my family viewed that as being rebellious. And in their minds, being rebellious was like alliance with the devil. And so it was something that had to be taken out of you. So one of the experiences where they tried to do that was when I was very young, about 4 years old. My grandfather decided that I was too rebellious, and he locked me in a room with himself for several hours all alone. My parents were gone. My grandmother was someplace upstairs, but I don't know where she was. And during those 4 hours, there was intense psychological abuse, intense emotional abuse, and things happened in that room to cause me to really lose my will. It's called will breaking. And I experienced this experience with my grandfather where I shut down that voice inside of me that said something's not right, that was there to guide me and lead me. I shut that down because of the intense situation he put me in. And from that time when I was 4 on to about 21, I continued to silence that voice inside. I continued to silence that little niggling, that gut feeling that something wasn't right. And I pretty much shut down my gifts, my skills, the things that I had to offer the world. And I even stayed silent about a lot of the abuse that was happening. In fact, some of the abuse that was happening, I didn't even realize that it was abusive because this was the only people that I knew. This is the only community that I had. We were so isolated. And that is why I like to call it a cult. That's why I think that definition fits. Well, one of the things in the cult was your parents are highly involved in finding a spouse for you. So when I got older, I was in a courtship. And the way I like to describe courtship is traditional dating, which probably most of you are familiar with, is where the guy and the girl, the man and the woman, if maybe it's different sexes or same sexes, but in my case, I'm straight, so a guy and a girl, you would, in traditional dating, be able to choose if you liked each other, if you wanted to start a relationship, how fast or slow that relationship went, what physical boundaries you had, and if and when you got married. With courtship, however, my parents were highly involved in this process, and also my grandfather, like I said, who was a pastor. And the man I started being in this courtship relationship with, my gut told me from the very first time we went out that something was wrong. This didn't feel right. But my grandfather convinced me to give it another try, to keep trying to get to know this man. And eventually I got engaged to him. Now, once we got engaged and we were tracking down the line to get married, some of the things that I had noticed before started really intensifying. The control got super strong. And there was all kinds of unreasonable expectations he had of me and ways he treated me that I now realized were abusive. And there were actually times when I felt very fearful to be alone with him. And I was afraid what would happen if I actually married this man, what else he might do to me once he felt like he had ultimate control over me and my body. Um, Thankfully, I was able to see this before I got married. And while I didn't understand fully and completely everything that had happened to me, again, because I was in a cult-like setting where women were already treated badly, I did start to realize that this wasn't safe. And so I ended that courtship relationship. But what happened to me is what happens to a lot of survivors of abuse. When you experience abuse, your body goes into a trauma response, and many people develop what is called post-traumatic stress disorder. And I had PTSD, not just from this relationship, but also from the other types of abuse I'd experienced in my childhood, from my church, from my family. And I began having severe panic attacks. And if you have ever had a panic attack, the first time you have it, you think you're having a heart attack. You think you're going to die. Those things are so scary. I went into a deep, dark depression, and I had suicidal thoughts. And, it was just so painful to keep living. He still attended our church, and I still felt like I had to go to that church community. So I was still seeing my abuser there all the time. And on top of that, I was still in this very controlling cult-like environment. But something amazing started to happen. So one of the things while I was experiencing those strong PTSD symptoms, one of the things that happened for me was it would be hard for me to sleep. Because when I would sleep, I would have nightmares and flashbacks to the abuse that I had experienced. I would feel trapped, and I would dream that he was watching me, and it was very terrifying to go to sleep. But on the other hand, when I was awake, all I could do was think about what had happened to me and how painful it was and how embarrassing it was to break off this very public engagement that I had had. And if you've been close to somebody who is a pastor's granddaughter or pastor's daughter, there's a little bit of a glass house kind of celebrity status in the church. So all eyes are on you when you're experiencing a breakup like that. It's very public. So I was experiencing so much trauma. What I would do at nights, though, to try to calm myself in the trauma, because I couldn't sleep and I didn't like being awake because I would think about what had happened to me, is I would stay up really late at night when the rest of my family had gone to bed. And remember, I had a fairly large family, so that was the only time I could be alone, was if I stayed up really late at night. And I would put in headphones and listen to music really loud just to try to drown out the thoughts in my own mind, but also not go to sleep. And one of these nights where I was up late, and I was finally alone, again, being in the small house with a large family, growing up in a cult, there were very few times I was alone. And when I was finally alone during those nights, one evening, I had this feeling come over my body, and I had a voice come into my head that said, "It's okay. Something big, something good's about to happen. It's going to be okay. Something big, something good is about to happen." And what I realize now was that that was the voice of my intuition. My intuition was speaking to me. That gut feeling was speaking to me and letting me know that it was going to be okay. Things aren't right, and there's hope. I should keep on living. And when I heard that little voice of my own intuition inside my head, it completely changed everything for me. I was like, oh my goodness, okay, I can hear myself think again. I can hear my intuition again. And it started opening my eyes to all of the things that had happened to me. And then on top of that, there was a woman who briefly visited the church that I grew up in and quickly was like, this is not for me. She worked at a coffee shop, and she invited me to come visit her while she was working there. And I did, and there was a man she introduced me to, and he believed in equality for women. And this was quite shocking to me because I had grown up believing that equality for women was bad, that was against the will of God and that was evil. But he was a really nice person, and he talked to me about that. He talked to me about my beliefs that women were not as equal to men. He talked to me about the very isolated upbringing and ideas that I had. And well, at first I didn't want to hear from him and I tried to shut that out. There was this voice inside again, the voice of my intuition that was like, hey, I think he's onto something. Maybe I should pay attention. And I tried to push it away, but he kept asking me questions about equality for women and what did I think about this and that. And so the stereotype is true. Homeschoolers are notoriously good debaters. So I decided to get this man off my back, I was going to have a debate with him. And to be a good debater, you have to know your opponent's argument better than they know it, so you can blow them out of the water and win the debate. So what happened there was I began to study the concepts of equality for women. And I was even able to study them from a faith perspective, which I still identified as Christian. And I was able to see how equality for women was actually a lot more logical. It was a lot kinder, and it led to less abuse. And that was scary for me because my entire life had been built on this idea that I was going to be a submissive woman, have all these children, and dominate the world through overpopulation, that I was going to be this good little wife whenever I got married. And so this idea that I could be equal, that I can make my own decisions, and that maybe being pushed into submissive positions against my will was actually abusive, that concept changed everything if I was to believe it. And so I remember one night, again late at night, when I was alone, I had just got done researching another article about equality for women and the connection between that and abuse. And I just started crying because I wanted to just shut down thinking about this equality for women stuff because it would be easier. And I knew my family would still accept me if I stayed a submissive woman. But that voice came up inside of me again and said, Ashley, there's something going on here. This equality for women, you know it's the truth. Keep researching it. And it's gonna be okay if you start believing in yourself again. And so I did. I kept researching this idea of equality for women. I kept researching abuse and realizing that so many of the things that had happened to me were not okay and were wrong. And I was also right about the fact that my family would not be supportive or happy about it. They became very hostile emotionally and calling me rebellious and just really putting me in a place that was very scary for me. And because I was a stay-at-home daughter, I didn't have a full-time job. I didn't have a college education. I really didn't know anybody outside the community, but just this radical act of believing that I was worthy and that I didn't deserve abuse, I didn't deserve to have to be pushed down as a submissive woman anymore, that changed my whole way of thinking. So guess what I did next? I followed my gut and I started widening my circle of friends. I bought a car. I spent all of my money on this terrible half-working car. And I went to meet other people outside of this isolated community. And I would do things like go swing dancing. And I'm telling you, my independent fundamentalist Baptist church, my family, my grandparents, they thought I had lost my mind because that was a sin to go dancing. I went and I watched movies at the movie theater, another sin. And then I decided that I was going to start dating and finding a partner that would be equal to me instead of going through this courtship where my parents were highly involved. And that was another shocker for everybody. But by listening to my gut, listening to my intuition, I kept broadening my circle. I kept seeing that there was so much more out there in the world. And the more goodness I saw, the more I realized how oppressive and isolating and how much abuse had been in my past. And when I started going swing dancing and, doing all these radical things like listening to Taylor Swift, people thought I lost my mind, but I knew inside that gut feeling was confirming that I was doing the right thing. I was taking these steps forward to take back the power of my life and to protect myself. And one of the best decisions I made was beginning to date my husband, my now husband, Will Easter. And he is such an incredible and amazing man. He believes in equality for women. He supported me in my healing from abuse journey. He has been my rock. And though neither of us really understood the extent of everything that had happened to me until I completely left the cult, he was there to support me. And I'm happy to say that we have been married for almost 6 years next month in November, and it has been the best experience in my life. And choosing him as a husband and him choosing me, both of those decisions on his end and on my end also came from a gut feeling, from an intuitive feeling. Of course, there were all the right things that were checked off the list too, but there was a feeling inside of me that I was like, can't put my finger on it, but I know he is the one. And he felt the same way. And it has been the best decision I've ever made. And he actually rescued me out of the cult by marrying me. And since then, I have been able to use my intuition to step into my life's calling of being an activist for survivors of abuse, starting my own business, starting a nonprofit, where we've had conferences for survivors of abuse for the last 4 years. And actually in October, we're having our 30 Days of Courage challenge for survivors of abuse. It's totally and completely free. I'll tell you more about that at the end. But it has just led me to take different leaps in my life. My intuition has led me to move states. I used to live in Virginia where I grew up, and now I live in North Carolina. And that was another gut feeling that it didn't totally make sense on the outside, but following my gut, both me and my husband moved to another state. And so intuition has been a huge part of my life. It has helped keep me safe. It has helped me realize when something was wrong, when certain people were dangerous, and times when I didn't listen to my gut, when I didn't trust my intuition. Unfortunately, those were times when I got into situations that were harmful for me. And that wasn't my fault, the abuse that I experienced. But if I had been in a position to follow my gut feelings, I could have made safer decisions for myself. But now that I am free, and now that I know I can trust my intuition, I listen to it every day, and it helps me make big and small decisions. It helps keep me safe, and it helps me in my healing journey. But I want to talk to you a little bit about intuition specifically now. So a lot of people hear my story and they're like, wow, that's really amazing. Her intuition led her out of a cult to understand some of the abuse she'd experienced and on her healing path, but that can never happen for me. But the truth is, every human being is born with a sense of intuition. Different people call it different things. Some people call it a gut feeling. Sometimes in religious communities, they'll call it something else. But intuition, I think, is the best term to use because it's really all inclusive. Intuition is not just for a special few people. If you are a human, and you are, you were born with an innate sense of intuition, and you can develop your intuition so it can be even stronger to help you make safer, wiser decisions for yourself. And whether you know it or not, you're actually using your intuition on a daily basis, even if it's not something that you readily realize. And I want to talk about next a couple of the ways intuition can show up. Now, I want you to pay really close attention here because I'm going to pose the question to you. What ways have you heard your intuition? I'm going to list 4 ways that intuition happens commonly for people, how they experience it commonly. And I would love for you to type in the chat box what way your intuition has showed up for you in the past. Some people, it shows up mainly in just one of the 4 ways. Other people, it's all 4 ways or a mix of the 4. But I want you to pay attention to what I'm saying. When you hear one that you're like, I've experienced my intuition that way in the past, I would love for you to type that in the chat box so we can share that with everybody here. Okay, so the first way that you can hear from your intuition is through feeling. So this is the most popular one that people talk about. Some people call it a gut feeling, but your gut isn't the only place you can feel your intuition. You can feel it maybe in your chest. Some people might feel it in their arm or shoulder. You might get chills going up and down your body, or all of a sudden feel hot or cold. But basically, your intuition can try to get your attention through giving you sensations in your body. And we're going to talk in a minute about how this is scientifically proven, your intuition. This isn't just some woo-woo spiritual thing. There's actually hard science behind this. But the first way that you can experience your intuition is through feeling. So if you've had a gut feeling or got chills down your spine that you felt like, when I get this gut feeling, I know something's off. This person or this situation, something doesn't seem right. Or maybe even you've had a gut feeling that it doesn't make sense, but I'm going to go take this risk and it's turned out amazing. Or maybe you've even had that gut feeling and you didn't trust it, but later realized, oh, I could have trusted that. I could have trusted that. That was actually accurate. So feeling is the first way you can experience your intuition. Then number 2 is seeing. And when I say seeing, I don't mean like literally physically seeing, but in your mind's eye. So your intuition is housed in your subconscious mind. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. But when your intuition is trying to get your attention, for some people, it will show up with kind of a vision in their mind or a picture that they see, or maybe they even see a set of words. For some people, their intuition shows up in meaningful dreams. If you've ever felt your intuition speaking to you through seeing, I'd love you to type that in the comments as well. The third way that you can experience your intuition is through hearing. And again, I'm not talking about an audible voice, but very similar to my story where I was listening to music really loud, but then all of a sudden I had a feeling come over my body. And then I heard the words inside my head, it's okay, something big, something good's about to happen. It's gonna be okay, something big, something good is about to happen. So maybe you have heard a song lyric and that prompted you to realize, oh, this means something to me, or this reminds me of something I need to go do. Maybe you've heard a phrase like I heard, or maybe it's just a word that happens. But hearing is another way you can experience your intuition. And then the fourth one, the last one, is through knowing. Some people, when they're experiencing their intuition, it's not that they really feel anything or that they envision something in their mind or imagination or that they hear some words in their heads. A lot of times intuition can just pop up as an instantaneous knowing. You don't know how you know the answer. You don't know why this person doesn't seem safe or why this opportunity seems really like something you should follow, but you just kind of know. And if you've ever had that knowing feeling, I'd invite you to also type that in the comments. Yes, so those are the 4 ways. The feeling, intuition can show up as feeling, seeing, hearing, in your mind's eye, in your mind's ear, or knowing. Okay, somebody says knowing. Yep, okay. Mary says knowing. Patrick says feelings, dreams, seeing, and knowing. Yes, excellent, excellent. Anybody else? All right, we'll just give that a minute, and I'd really encourage you all to participate if you feel comfortable. But yeah, okay, awesome, awesome. Great, so you can continue typing if anything comes to your mind of an experience where you felt your intuition. But some people, intuition gets a bad rap because some people associate intuition with being like woo-woo and spiritual and like just kind of not based in reality. It can't be trusted. But there's actually science behind intuition. And I want to share some of that with you because when you understand that there's science behind intuition, you can have the confidence to trust it. And when you trust your intuition, it's always right. It's always going to lead you to safety, to love, and expansion. And so intuition is super important. It's something that humans have evolved to have. And there's actually science behind it. Okay. Let's see. Intuition has been my saving grace. Yes, yes. My intuition was hurt when I asked a priest for help. Now it is a feeling deep in my gut. Yep. However, it's taken years to trust it again. Yes, yes. And at the end, we're going to talk a bit about understanding the difference between intuition and something else. And yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing those things. All right, so let's jump into the science. And I know this is a little geeky, but I promise you this is interesting stuff, okay? So this is how intuition works. Your brain has many different parts, okay? And I'm not a neuro scientist. But I'm going to simplify a little bit for us today because there's so many more parts than just the right side and the left side of the brain. But you've got two sides of your brain. You have the right side of your brain and you have the left side of your brain. Now, the left side of your brain, this is the slower, more analytical side of your brain. This is the side of your brain that's very aware of what is happening around you. It's the side of your brain that is associated with solving math problems and really kind of doing tasks step by step that you are fully consciously aware of. So, you know, if you get into your car, like, let's do it this way. The first time you ever drove a car, you remembered very consciously in the left side of your brain, in your conscious mind, you had to sit down in the seat. Then you had to find your keys and put it in the ignition. Then you had to put it in the right gear. Then you had to push your foot on the pedal and steer the wheel. In the very beginning, you were using the left side of your brain. It was very conscious, it was very methodical, and you really had to think through that process. But now, after years of driving a car, that almost comes automatically. And that automatic part is actually happening in the right side of your brain. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the right side of your brain is where your intuition is housed. The left side of your brain, again, it's going to be very aware. It's going to be aware of every step along the way in a process. So for instance, I like to use the description of solving a math problem. So it's like your logical brain, it doesn't just do this for math, it does for other things. Your logical brain, the left side of your brain, your conscious mind, it has to see the math problem. It has to remember back to that time in high school or in college where you learned how to solve it. It has to remember each and every one of the steps. It has to execute each and every one of those steps to solve the math problem. And then finally at the end, you write down the answer, okay? That's really how the left side of your brain works, the conscious side of your brain works. And that's good, but what if you forgot one of the steps? Or what if you remembered all the steps, but you're dyslexic like me and you wrote one of the numbers wrong? And so at the end of that whole calculation, your answer's not correct. Or maybe it even is correct, but it took so much time for you to get to that answer. It probably took a few minutes to solve that math problem. That's really how the left side, the conscious side of your brain works. The right side of your brain, however, is more of the automatic side of your brain, the more instinctual side. The side where after you've learned to drive the car, you don't even have to think about putting your keys in the ignition. In fact, you may even lose track of time where you're driving to home, from work to home because you're on autopilot. That's the subconscious side of your brain. And it actually goes through very similar analytical processes to the left side of the brain, but it does it under the surface and it does it very quickly and very accurately because the logic side of your brain only has access to the information in your surroundings and anything you can remember in your past. Not your full past, but anything you can remember. Your subconscious mind, where your intuition is housed, it does all of this processing automatically and it has more data points to pull from. It's so much more accurate because your logical mind isn't getting in the way and your subconscious mind is just remembering all the steps perfectly and doing it quickly. Scientists sometimes call it rapid cognition. That's a scientific word for intuition. It's just rapid cognition. So it's going through a similar analytical process to solving the math problem like you would with your conscious mind, but it's doing it under the surface and it's doing it in about 1 to 3 seconds. That's how fast your intuition can show up. And the way it gets your attention, because it's in the subconscious mind, you're not aware of it, it's got to get your attention some way. So it has to bring that information that you've stored, that your intuition has picked up on, to your conscious mind to be aware of what the answer is. And so that's why sometimes you just get a sense of knowing. You don't know how you got to that answer. You don't know why this is the right way to go or why you shouldn't trust that person, but you get a gut feeling, or you hear a phrase in your mind, or you have a dream, or you know, any of those different things, just a sense of knowing. That's because your intuition has been looking at all the data points, solving the problem, and it just came to your mind and gave you the answer, and it's getting your attention through one of those 4 ways. And in addition to having your intuition working a lot faster, it has more access to data points than your conscious mind does. So your conscious mind, the slow part of your brain, it can only remember what it can remember. It can only see around what it can see, but your subconscious mind, it's like a computer. It can store things for a long, long time. So the memories you can't remember in your conscious mind, your subconscious mind is still thinking about those things. It still has that information. So a long time ago, when something happened when you were a child and your subconscious mind was like, oh, in this set of circumstances, I need to watch out for X, Y, and Z. Though your conscious mind might not be able to remember it, your subconscious mind keeps track of that, and that helps gives you the answers through your intuition. Other data points it has access to. Your intuition can understand what's happening energetically in the room. Have you ever walked into a room and you don't know anybody there and you haven't even heard what they're talking about, but you just get kind of like a bad feeling? Like, I think somebody is upset. Like, it feels like an argument just went down. That is your intuition picking up on the energy of the room. And the cool thing is, all of us are made up of energy. Quantum physics has proven that. Other sciences have proven that. And so even I have this coaster right here with me. It's made of stone, and I just put my drink glass on it. It looks like a solid, but if you were to zoom in on it with a superpower microscope, you would realize that it's actually not a solid. There's actually a lot of different particles that aren't even touching each other, and all of that is wavelengths. It's all energy that's moving. So this is energy, but so is my body, so is my thoughts, so are my words. Everything in the entire universe is energy. And while your conscious mind can't always pick up on different energy shifts, your subconscious mind, your intuition can. And so that's how sometimes you can walk into a room and you can be like, I think people are upset. I don't know why, but that's because your subconscious is realizing that, and it's letting you know through those 4 ways you experience intuition. Another data point that your intuition has access to that your logical mind doesn't is through DNA memory. So has anybody heard of epigenetics? This is one of the coolest, most amazing sciences that I think we've discovered recently. Basically, epigenetics is the study of how DNA changes and can be passed from generation to generation. So one of the studies that was done was on Holocaust survivors. People who've gone through the terrors and the horrors of the Holocaust understandably had their DNA altered and changed. That's just what happens when you experience trauma. And they experience symptoms like post-traumatic stress disorder, all the normal things you experience when you experience trauma. But then those researchers began to track those survivors' children who had not lived through the Holocaust. They were still displaying some of the same triggers as the people who had actually survived that situation. And what happens when you look at it is that DNA has sort of like toggle switches. So it can turn a DNA sequence on or off. And when you've experienced a form of trauma, or even if you've experienced a form of like heightened excitement, a DNA component can be turned on and lit up. And then when that DNA is like a button turned on or lit up, when you have children, that DNA strand can be passed on to them, and it can be passed on even 7 generations forward. And so your intuition not only has access to your experiences in your life, but it also has access to the different triggers or the different, even positive triggers that your ancestors experienced. And one of the things that I like to liken this to is, has anybody seen the cats and cucumbers video? It's kind of sad. It's kind of mean, but if you go on YouTube and you just Google like cats and cucumbers, you'll see tons of YouTube videos where people are setting cucumbers or zucchini squashes by cats. And the cats catch it from the corner of their eye and they jump and run because they think that it is a snake. But the interesting thing is, cats who've never seen a snake and have only lived in the house their whole life, they still jump and run. And that's because that DNA has been passed on from their mama cats or their daddy cats. And so that's how epigenetics works. But our intuition has access to all of those data points and several others. And so because there's science behind intuition, because there is a way that we can understand this subconscious process is working in our favor under the surface, you can know that you can trust that good gut feeling. You can know that you can trust that sense of knowing you have, or that phrase that pops into your head, or that vision or dream that you have. That's your intuition there to protect you. And I've seen intuition help me stay safe, help me find healthy relationships and warn me about dangerous relationships. It's helped me understand and kind of sense the energy when somebody is having a bad day and I need to show some compassion to them even before they said anything. Intuition has helped me make strides in my activism career, helping survivors of abuse and really being cutting edge, because I was willing to take risks and go further and stand up stronger based on my intuition's guiding. And intuition can help you on your healing path. So sometimes you'll feel your intuition, if you get quiet enough to listen, guide you to maybe trying a new therapist, or you might ask your intuition, what's my next step in my healing path? And your intuition might give you a gut feeling about, hey, maybe you need to go to the SNAP conference. Or your intuition might guide you to a support group. Or it might guide you away from a therapist who isn't right for you. But tuning in and tapping into your intuition is a super, super powerful tool to keep you safe and to help you on your healing journey. And we're going to get into questions in just about 2 minutes, but I want to share some practical tools with you really quick. So your question might be, well, intuition sounds great, and I know I have some sense of intuition, but I'd really like to be able to strengthen it. What are some ways I can strengthen my intuition and hear it more clearly and more often? So my favorite way to strengthen intuition is getting quiet and doing some meditation. So as you'll recall in my story, the times I was able to hear my intuition again was when I got quiet and when I was alone. When you're constantly having the TV or radio on, when you're constantly having people talk to you, it's really hard to hear your intuition in many cases, particularly if your intuition has been shoved down by abusers or other people telling you can't trust yourself. So my first tip for you is to get still and quiet. And even if it's just for 5 minutes a day, just sit still and quiet and try to listen to your body. I also like visualization meditations. You can just Google those. And find them on YouTube to help you, connect with your intuition. But even just getting quiet for 5 minutes a day and asking your intuition a question, that can be super powerful in you getting information from your subconscious mind. The other thing I like to use is journaling. If you write down a question you have for your intuition, maybe it's a problem you want to solve, or maybe it's a scenario you can't find the answer to, or you're not sure if you should take this job or not, write the question on the top of the page, do a little meditation, and then immediately after that meditation, while you're still in a meditative state, start journaling and just write whatever comes first to your mind and just kind of flow write and see what comes up. I've done that before, and just the process of journaling and letting whatever comes up be written on the page, that's given me so much wisdom from my intuition. And the last one is the 3-second rule. The 3-second rule, you'll remember, intuition scientifically is called rapid cognition. That's because the process of intuition happens so quickly under the surface, and it can give you an answer in 1 to 3 seconds. Well, what I like to do, a way I like to practice with my intuition, is by asking it a question and then seeing what comes up automatically in the first 1 to 3 seconds. After 3 seconds, usually your logical mind gets involved and tries to convince you one way or other. But listen to the first 3 seconds, what comes up for you instantly. And if that one isn't as easy for you, I would go and try doing the meditation first and then ask your question and see what comes up in the first 3 seconds. So there's so many other tools for intuition. I actually teach a course called Intuition Mastery, going deeper. But that is intuition. That's why it's so important. And it has completely changed my life as a survivor. It's helped me heal and get a lot safer. The last thing I want to say before we open it up for questions is there is a difference between ego and intuition. Now, when I say ego, I don't mean that you're being like egotistical and like a mean person, but there's a part of our brain that wants to keep us playing safe. And I don't mean staying safe, I mean playing safe, staying small, not going out of the box or expanding into, you know, bigger opportunities in our life. The ego is all about fear. The ego is all about staying inside of your comfort zone. And it usually has a lot of anxious energy around it. If you hear a voice that has a lot of anxious energy, or you get a feeling that has a lot of anxious energy, and if it's all about playing small and not going out of your comfort zone, that's probably your ego. The ego is based in fear and playing small. Your intuition, however, is always going to be from a place of love and expansion. Your intuition wants the best for you, and it's willing to help you take risks, but risks that are going to be beneficial for you. Your intuition isn't going to be anxious or fearful. Your intuition is going to come in a calm, cool, you know, voice, just like, this is the answer, or don't go that way, or watch out for this person. It's not going to have a lot of emotion and anxiety involved. So those are my tips on tapping into your intuition. There are so many other things I could share. And so I would love to just open it up for questions right now. All right, let me see. Mary, are you going to want to moderate the questions? Mary Dispenza, are you there? If you are, you're on mute. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. Okay, question time.
Question time. This is from one of the participants. Can you explain the relationship between intuition and having another person validate your feelings? Do you need both for real change? My gut tells me I need to confront my abuser, but I am also looking for outside validation.
That's a really great question. So you know your intuition best, and your intuition knows you best. So you should trust your gut and what your intuition is telling you over what any other person says. Now, it's good to take in information and get more information so that can help inform your intuition. But if your gut is telling you to do something, I always encourage you to trust it. That being said, it can help us gain confidence in our intuition when we're able to be with people who support us. I know for me, when I was starting the Courage Conference, I got a gut feeling that I need to do this. And I told my husband about it, and he's like, I believe in you. You know, I'm supporting you. And it was my intuition that told me to do it, but it was helpful to have that person from the outside there to support me.
Thank you. Doesn't it help to pay attention to and pray to your guardian angel who may be trying to tell you something?
You know, different people have different belief systems. I like to talk about intuition from like a scientific standpoint, but certainly different religions, different spiritual practices, they will use terms like angels or Holy Spirit or, you know, Kundalini energy, those types of things. I think that you can, I think you can use different words for intuition. And so if that's what you call your intuition, I'd say definitely listen to it.
And how do you learn to listen to your intuition when you're afraid to trust it again, when it has let you down so much in the past?
Okay, so what I would say here is your intuition won't let you down. However, sometimes our ego, and I don't mean you're being egotistical, but the part of your brain that's based in anxiety and fear and trying to keep you playing small, and those types of things, those can really masquerade as intuition. So the work here is understanding the distinction between the two. And one of the top ways you can realize that is when it's your intuition, it's going to be very calm. It's going to be very matter of fact, and there's not going to be a lot of emotion around it. The other thing to know is intuition is like a muscle. It's something that you have to strengthen. So if you're like me, I grew up in that very oppressive environment. It doesn't even have to be a cult. It could just be an abuser where they're telling you you can't trust yourself and that you should trust them. Sometimes we're just not as good at hearing our intuition, but by doing some of those meditations and things and testing out your intuition on small things, like maybe just go on a follow your gut day where you have 3 hours set aside and you just ask your intuition, where should I go next? And maybe it leads you to a coffee shop or to a park or to a bookstore, but just ask your intuition to guide you in some small ways so you can begin gaining your confidence there and actually hearing its voice and being able to tell the difference between that and the ego side of the brain.
And Ashley, you touched on this one. It has to do with trauma. What
Yeah.
if your brain, and someone mentioned a disability, has been damaged, such as mine in infancy, resulting in being on the autistic spectrum?
Yeah. Well, I believe that every single person has intuition. No matter what type of disability a person has, they still have a subconscious mind. And so you are fully capable of having a good sense of intuition. And actually, I think people who experience autism, that they can actually really have a strong sense of intuition because they're able to focus on certain things really clearly. So I would maybe do some research and just Google like intuition and autism, but I suspect that similar to ADHD, a lot of learning disabilities actually heighten your sense of intuition. So I would look into that.
And are your parents okay now with your decisions?
No, they are not. I haven't spoken to them in about 5 years, unfortunately.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry. And
Thank you.
also a question about clericalism. And in all churches, it's really a major force in keeping a tight rein on everything. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on in churches really ever changing.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of study actually on church history because I am an ordained minister, but in a very progressive church that, is very inclusive of other religions. So I support people's individual beliefs as long as they're not hurting anyone. But what I've researched with like Christian churches, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, is that when you go back in history, the actual structure of the church was created with political motives. So you had Constantine in the Roman Empire who really created this structure. He created Christianity as the national religion. And with that, he appointed different bishops and things. And of course, later on in church history, that's changed a little bit in different denominations. But before that, before there was that structure, I think people were more self-guided and they learned from each other. They listened to their intuition, and there was a lot of different beliefs and people who were accepting of other people's beliefs. So I'm not sure that the structure that was created by a political force can ever be without power and control dynamics. I think maybe individual churches can be not controlling, but the whole church at large, I think it was created to keep people, boxed into one way of thinking. And so I think it's really difficult for it to, let people make decisions for themselves in a lot of cases.
Does anyone else want to weigh in with a question? That may be the end of our questions for now.
All right. Well, I would just love to encourage everybody. You have intuition. It's there to protect you. And if you don't hear it clearly and strongly right now, that's something that can definitely be developed. It's a skill. It's a muscle that you can strengthen. And so I would encourage you to look into ways. One of those ways is I'll be offering it again next year, is my Intuition Mastery course. And if you just want to go to my social media, you can see that on the side of the screen. I guess it's, yeah, I was pointing the other way. You know, on Instagram, you can follow me there, or if you go to ashlyeaster.com, I was trying to point to it, you can follow me and I will talk more about intuition. But just as a side note, really quickly, I have something that I am offering, and this is a free 30-day challenge for survivors and advocates that's happening on the Courage 365 Facebook group. You can just go to Courage 365 on Facebook and you'll find information about it. You get inside the group and we've got amazing speakers happening all during October, like Leah Remini from Scientology, Jonathan Sheck, who's an actor and survivor. We've got all kinds of amazing speakers. Plus, we're going to be having activities and other ways to connect with survivors and advocates. It's going to be super supportive. It's go at your own pace, completely free online. Just go to Courage 365 on Facebook and join the group. So good to be here.
And thank you, Ashley. You did not disappoint. You enlightened and inspired us to trust our intuition and on our healing journey. And thanks, friends, for coming. Please visit the homepage and watch Mitch Garabedian and consider a donation to SNAP to support such healing work as this conference. Have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe. Blessings. Thank you.